I'll start off by indicating that my name is Moses Khangale. I'm a director within the National Disaster Management Center here in South Africa. I'm responsible for fire services. I'm also assisting the head of the Disaster Management Center with issues related to search and rescue, urban search and rescue, as well as matters related to the International Search and Rescue Advisory Group, the INSARAC network. So that is my role within the organization. So I also want to take this opportunity once more to thank you for giving us an opportunity to share some thoughts with you on how we can improve disaster preparedness by focusing on local level action, which will be the focus of my topic. I thought that this is a particularly relevant topic in line with some of the evolving trends and patterns that we are witnessing across the globe, where the focus has now moved from relying largely on international capabilities coming to respond, but rather depending on local agencies to improve and to respond effectively. And I think the reality brought about by COVID-19 is also essentially saying to us, you might not necessarily get international assistance because of COVID-19 restrictions. Hence, you need to ensure that your own capabilities locally is geared to deal with hazards that you may face. So I will have a very brief presentation, and there will be an observation on the trends and patterns. I'll have something on the problem statement, the rationale for investing in local action, and some of the strategies that we can deploy to enhance local level disaster response. So that was the outline. I should have moved. But if you look at this figure on slide 3, this figure summarizes the risks and the evolution of risks that we're facing. Essentially, it's about unsustainable development practices, as well as climate change and its impact on natural hazards and on disaster risks generally. And the observation out of this slide is that more and more people are vulnerable and are at risk of hazard occurrences, and we're witnessing that due to climate change, the intensity and the coverage of hazards is changing drastically, and that's something that necessitates robust local level systems in order for vulnerable countries or regions to be able to deal and respond, prepare, respond and recover rapidly from disaster occurrences. And of course, we located within the southern region, southernmost tip part of the African continent, and the observation that we are making is that like other regions in the world, we're seeing a lot of an exponential increase in weather-related hazards, hazard occurrences or disaster risks, and we feel that this is to a certain extent linked to changing climate and variability, of course, as well as indicated in the last slide, to urbanization, unplanned and spontaneous urbanization. But I made the point here that we also see that there's an increase in incidents, particularly wildland fires, linked to the concept of wildland-urban interface. It's not a unique Southern African concept. It's something that we're witnessing in many parts of the globe. And part of what I'm communicating with this is that when we look at local level action and strategies, we also need to recognize the evolving risks that we face as communities and as regions and as countries. But the critical issue is that, of course, you cannot live in a risk-free environment, but you need to be able to manage the risks that you face. And what compounds these risks in some cases is that there's limited institutional capacity at the local level to manage the risks. So hence the focus on this discussion to say, what is it that needs to be done to ensure and improve local level readiness to deal with disasters, both from a preparedness point as well as from a response point. And I used a storm that happened in January, February, that affected parts of Mozambique, parts of South Africa, parts of Botswana, and parts of Zimbabwe. And the essential message that I wanted to put across with this example is that we're seeing lots and lots of these storms. They're becoming more and more intense, and that the majority of people who are losing their lives in these storm-related incidents, we're noting that that has to do with drowning, and this is important to ensure that when you build local level response capability, you are also able to recognize where you are losing lives. As much as you would want to have structured response capability for collapses, building collapses, and major incidents involving trains and other rail networks and so on, which you will require typically your urban search and rescue capabilities. The point that is being made here is that capabilities should also be built to suit your local risk context. And if more people are drowning in storm incidents, it means that you need to enhance your water rescue capabilities, shift water training, and wide area search, to name but a few. And I think we were already reflecting on the reasons why it is important to invest in local level action. And I think the point that I'm making here is that, yes, urban search and rescue teams classified by INSARAC and EMTs or emergency medical teams within the WHO framework are critical because they will be required in particular incidents, earthquakes and so on, and collapses. But I think the point that I'm making here is that capabilities must be adapted to the risks. So if you are in an earthquake zone, you typically will have a lot of such capabilities, but in some cases, we're seeing that there's a mismatch between capabilities and risks profile. And some saying that we need to build local level capabilities to be able to also deal with severe weather occurrences, for example, because that's where we see most and more incidents, as well as wildland fires, because we see a lot of that. That's why I spoke about the urban interface and the implication from a risk management point. And the point that I'm making also is that local level response is something that is now globally recognized to be critical and integral to effective disaster response. And I think it resonates with the slogan by the United Nations of as local as possible, as international as necessary. So the focus is that where possible, everything must be localized. Of course, there will be cases where there's a need for international response based on the scale and complexity of the incident and so on. But the default position is that it should be local as possible. And I think the point here that I also wanted to advance is that, simply speaking, communities living in hazard-prone areas are first responders. Of course, they are not governmental responders, but government response build on their efforts. Because when you respond to a fire in an informal settlement or in a rural community, you will find people there. They might have done what they can to bring it under control, but the essential issue that I want to raise is that their involvement is critical, and that governmental agencies need to do everything within their power to empower these communities and other, networks and organizations operating at a community level to ensure that that initial response that is provided before the fire department arrives is done by, in a structured way by people with the basics to can contribute in a meaningful way. So the question that I think we might have to also answer is, how then do we, enhance local level response? And I identified a few points, I think about 10 points that I thought are important. They are not in any order or any of priority or sequence, but I thought that what is critical for any intervention is that we need to first understand what are the capabilities that exist in a particular community. So we need to have an assessment to understand at a local level in this specific community what is available to respond or to contribute to disaster risk reduction and community resilience building. And that once you have done that assessment and you know what are the gaps, you can then move towards the adoption of a first responder capacity building program, where you begin to say, how do you close the gaps and how do you strengthen community preparedness? But very important, it's there's no one size fits all. My experience is that such interventions should be seamlessly aligned to local prevalent risk dynamics. So if you are in an area that is prone to wildland fires, it means even the capacity building should be reflective of that. And those that are in earthquake zones and those that are in flood-prone areas, everybody must plan and build capacity in line with the risks that they face. And that one of the other issues that I think the global community could also contribute to is through provision of flexible response training packages. Be it on emergency and rescue, be it on through your light teams concept, be it through your emergency medical team framework, whatever framework that is used. I think the important thing is that there must be interventions to support developing countries, including in our own continent in Africa, where there's not enough or adequate structured, organized capabilities for rescue and for other, response requirements. Also, very important is the need to establish partnerships between local and regional governmental agencies, between international NGOs and private sector. So the point, I think, is that effective local level response requires all of society approach so that you are able to confront the issues and then mobilize all resources to maximize the impact. And I think one of the issues that is important linked to training is the the issue of equipment, because if you look at hazards and if you take this storm that came through the Mozambican Channel, the trajectory is predictable, and your weather services would ordinarily say this is how this is the trajectory of the storm. So it tells you that with proper planning, you can place equipment strategically, in areas that are projected to be on the path of the storm, and then ensure that there's quick response. The next point I think relates to, I spoke about placement of equipment strategically, but one of the issues that I think we do not do well enough as disaster management practitioners is exercises. We need to conduct more multidisciplinary simulations and exercises based on the risks that we face, because there are annual risks that countries are exposed to, and then you can begin to exercise your systems to test your level of readiness and to identify gaps in your response systems in order to improve when the actual incidences occur. Another important point is relates to early warning. How do we use early warning to improve community level response? Because if you look at severe weather, there's sufficient lead time in relation to when you think, when your weather services will inform you the storm will make landfall and its trajectory and so on. So it tells you that with proper planning at a local level, you could be in a position to already start moving your equipment to areas within the path of the storm, moving your personnel, so that you avoid attempting to move equipment and personnel when the area is submerged in water and you can't move around. So these are some of the things that I think we could look at to improve. How do we use early warning to prepare for these storms at a local level? Because storms are predicted in advance. So I think it's an area that could be improved upon, and that local level responders, of course, they could be organized. It's easier to work with organized groups than with individuals. It could be NGOs, it could be teams interested in disaster response, it could be volunteers, it could be whatever associations that could be there. If you want to improve their involvement and maximize on their contribution, it's critical that they are involved in local level disaster management structures led by government, so that already on a regular basis you have a sense of what they can provide, what are their capabilities, what are their weaknesses, what are their strengths, and they can also be part of dialogue and conversations around the risks and what needs to be done to jointly confront the risks. So I think the point here is that they must be integrated into existing institutional structures to avoid parallel structures. Of course, very important is that we need to encourage innovative approaches, and innovative approaches are critical in the context of COVID-19 because your traditional methods of doing things are not always applicable or possible. We need to find ways of sharing expertise, like using virtual platforms like we are doing now, and share good practices and case studies. And that should be done among countries, amongst organizations, in order for us to have stronger coordination and response to disasters when they occur. Local level response is critical and integral to effective disaster response system, and that we must ensure from a governmental side that there are context relevant governance arrangement that ensure this involvement is structured and there's accountability. Local risk dynamics must be considered when developing flexible response packages, avoid one-size-fits-all mentality and approaches. There's a need to strengthen ongoing partnerships between networks and agencies at the local level, and that all these activities also require funding, be it capacity building, be it equipment, and creating of systems. So the last point that I'm making is that funding should be mobilized to support implementation of flexible local level response.